This is an NBC Palm Springs special report. Coronavirus facts, not fear. Presented by East Valley COVID-19 testing site, serving residents of eastern Coachella Valley.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us for this NBC Palm Springs special report, Coronavirus Facts, Not Fear. We dedicate this half hour each and every night to in-depth interview with a range of experts and professionals, because now more than ever, it's vital that we hear directly from our local leaders as we sift through confusing and rapidly changing information. Let's get to it tonight. U.S. coronavirus deaths has topped 108,000, and the number of confirmed COVID cases, 1.87 million. More than 6.5 million infected worldwide, and 388,000 people have lost their lives due to this infection. Join us now live via Skype is Dr. Norbert Bischofberger, one of the developers of Tamiflu, a former key executive at Gilead Sciences, and he also worked on developing remdesivir, a drug showing promise in the fight against COVID-19. He's currently the president and CEO of Kronos Bio. Dr. Bischofberger, thank you for joining us once again. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Here's a question that's been sort of plaguing me throughout the day today. The virus started. The numbers were going up. We shut down schools. We shut down businesses. We shut down the economy. The numbers kept going up. We started wearing masks and gloves and sanitizing. The numbers keep going up. Now we've reopened. The numbers are still going up. So I guess my question tonight is it possible that no matter what we do, the cases are going to keep going up?
Well, the new infections and also the deaths keep going up. That's a true statement. But if you look at the absolute number of new infections, then the number of daily deaths, they have come down. They reached a peak a few weeks ago, and I think this isolation and quarantine has actually worked. And you know, the other thing I'm observing now in my neighborhood here, I'm actually going to work again daily. The shops have adopted, there's actually a sandwich shop next door to where I work, and they have become, they told customers, call your order in half an hour before. There are marks on the sideway where you should stand and wait. One person goes in, picks up the sandwich, the other person comes out. In our own building, in the commercial building, they have, for instance, the bathroom doors can be opened with the foot. You don't need to touch the door handle again. There are sanitizers everywhere. So I do think we have changed how we behave, how we live, and I think it will ultimately lead to a lower infection rate. I think it's not going to completely disappear. That would be unreasonable to believe. And what you were saying is correct. It is going still up in the sense it hasn't completely stopped. But if you look at the daily new infections and the daily deaths, they have really come down. They reached a peak a few weeks ago. So I'm pretty optimistic about all of this.
One of our local doctors, a pandemologist, a virologist, who's been studying this and was one of the first ones to warn us that this was coming, and this was in early March. He's telling us now that he's noticing an increase in hospitalization, at least here in the Coachella Valley, that the beds are starting to fill up. Is that a concern for you going forward, that as we get back into a normal swing of things, we're going out again, we're going into restaurants, even at reduced capacity, but still we're going to start to see hospital beds fill up, and then we may end up in that spot we so feared, which was no place to put sick people?
Well, I'm not familiar, of course, with the doctor's experience in your area, but I am hearing nothing here. I'm living in the San Francisco Bay Area, and there were whole wards were allocated to COVID infected patients. They were never used. For the most part, this was a non-event. I shouldn't say a non-event. It was, of course, terrible for the people that died of it, but it wasn't this event that, so hospitals couldn't treat patients and there was a lack of ER beds. That wasn't the case here. And I do think going forward, we will continue to have cases. There will continue to be COVID cases. There will continue to be deaths until we have either a treatment or a good treatment or a vaccine available. But I think it's going to be manageable.
All right, coming up after the break, we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Bischofberger. We're going to talk about treatment, which of course he is on the forefront of, and then we're going to talk about the idea of a vaccine. How far off are we really when we come back? All right, continue our conversation now with Dr. Norbert Bischofberger. Doctor, we spoke about it the last time we visited, remdesivir, a drug that you were integral in creating after also, of course, Tamiflu, also one of your drugs. Pretty good results using it as a treatment so far. What are you hearing?
Yeah, it clearly, there were placebo-controlled studies, blinded studies. The drug clearly worked. It reduced hospitalization rates by about 4 days, so from 15 days to 11. That was very clear. Other studies also were not as statistically significant, but it showed the same trend. But as I pointed out last time, I do believe that an antiviral like remdesivir would have a better efficacy if given earlier in the disease course. And I'm saying this simply for two reasons. First of all, it's common observation with viruses. They infect people, they do their damage, and then they leave, but then the body deals with the damage for a few weeks afterwards. That's, for instance, the case with influenza. The virus is in your body for about 5 or 6 days, but you can be sick for 3 weeks. And it has been shown with Tamiflu. Tamiflu should be given within 48 hours of symptom onset. So as soon as you feel the first symptoms, take it, then it works really well. If you wait for too long, then the efficacy is gone. The other thing I would like to also point out, there are other treatments that are being evaluated that are not antivirals. So it looks like the disease goes from a viral infection to something more of an inflammation. So later on, when you get to the hospital, when you're intubated, when you're on a ventilator, it may be more of an inflammatory disease. And what's currently being tested, would anti-inflammatories work in that situation?
Yeah, and they're also starting the first human trial of antibody treatments. Can you explain that to us?
Yes, so there was a few papers published in, I think it was in JAMA, maybe a month or two ago, where they took convalescent plasma. And this is also very common. A person that had coronavirus infection recovered, typically they have antibodies. So you isolate the plasma, which contains the antibodies, and you use that as a treatment for newly infected patients. The jury is still out, but I think absolutely that has a good chance. And there is at least one company that I know of, they're using recombinant antibodies. So instead of using plasma from convalescent patients, you can actually make these antibodies by recombinant DNA technology. I think that has a very good chance. The challenge there is you need a fairly large amount. And, the scale up is not that simple with antibodies. It just takes time. When I was still at Gilead, we estimated the time required to make antibodies on a really large scale is between 18 and 36 months. Now you can speed that up, but it's not something you can just do in a few months or so.
Right. And so whatever we come up with, whether it's a treatment or a vaccine, it's going to have to be done on a massive scale, likely a scale we've never had to do before. Right.
That's the other challenge. But, it can be done. It just takes a certain lead time. With vaccines, I'm a little bit less concerned because the amount required to vaccinate somebody is something of the order of micrograms. Whereas, given a recombinant antibody, typically the dose is in the order of grams. So that's an order of 10 to the 6th or a million-fold higher. That's why antibodies have a bigger challenge than vaccines.
Sure. All right. If we're ever going to see full soccer stadiums again or full baseball stadiums again, massive concerts with 100,000 people involved, we're going to have a vaccine or at least a really, really effective treatment, but most likely a full-blown vaccine that will stop people from getting it on a massive scale. Realistically, how close or how far away are we from that?
So I'm a little bit more skeptical about this, what you read in the press about we will have a vaccine this year. So, it's important to remember there are 3 questions that need to be answered. The first one, does the vaccine elicit a neutralizing antibody response? Now, that's fairly easy to determine. Secondly, how long does that antibody response last? And it looks like right now that, for instance, if you look at polio or hepatitis B, those are lifelong immunities. It looks like now that corona is not as bad as flu, that you need a new vaccine every season, but it does mutate, and maybe we will need a new vaccine every 2 years because the virus has mutated and the vaccine that worked 2 years ago is not active anymore. Now, that's not the big challenge. You just figure out what's the new circulating strain. You make a new vaccine against it and vaccinate the population again. But the third question that has to be answered, and that's the most important one, and that's safety. How? Because you give this potentially to millions of healthy individuals, it has to be absolutely safe. And you can only do that by, testing it in, it used to be in 100,000s of people. And there's one other thing I would like to point out in terms of vaccines, and that has to do with, it escapes me now. So, yeah, the safety is the important part. So, how do you determine that? Oh, yeah, the other thing I want to point out, so in order to really ascertain whether a vaccine works, in the end, you would have to do a challenge study. So in other words, you take healthy individuals, you vaccinate them, they develop antibodies, and in order to determine whether these antibodies are truly protective, you would infect these individuals with the coronavirus. Now, that is a big ethical question, and ethics boards who have to agree to this, I am not convinced they will, because simply the reason is there's no treatment available. If we had treatment available that's really effective, then this would be a no-brainer experiment. You simply infect these people with coronavirus, and if they develop the disease, you treat them, and then you're done. But we don't have a 100% effective treatment yet. So I venture to say a vaccine is about 18 months away. That's my own personal opinion. I hope I'm wrong.
Wow, but that's something that I don't think has been mentioned before, in that if you have to infect somebody when there's no treatment, there's a huge ethical question there. Dr. Bischofberger, thank you so much, as always, for your time, sir. And I think we all need to get you back in the lab.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're back after the break.
Okay.